Howdy ho, folks. So I'm going to do a little bit of a monologue here discussing how exactly Antifa is just like the Nazis. And on this particular monologue, we're going to go into iconoclasm. Why Antifa and the Nazis are similar in that respect, what iconoclasm is, and why it's, quite frankly, a very wrong thing to do. So let's get started. Now, the hot topic of the current events is the Confederate statues primarily. And you have not just Antifa, but other people on the alt left, how I'm going to define them. And you have certain leftist groups, not even in the alt left, that seem to think that is a good idea. And they base this logic off a very simple idea that the Civil War was just about slavery, and the Confederates were evil slave-owning bastards that just wanted to betray the U.S. And quite frankly, history is a little bit more complex than that. Obviously, we see history being made even today. History is a constant thing being made. Logically speaking, obviously, we can tell that it's a little bit more nuanced than just one side is right, one side is wrong, and there are just two sides. Obviously, there are a lot of different perspectives. As you can see, just going and talking to different people in the streets. But their basic idea is we need to remove the Confederate statues because they're dedicated to slave-owning, racist white men. While some of it's true, guess what? That's not the entirety of history. It's a bit, again, as I say, more complex. You had, during the Civil War, slave-holding states that decided to stay with the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation was not issued till 1863, 3 years into the war. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which freed the slaves, which was the thing that banned slavery in this country, wasn't ratified till 1865, after the Civil War had ended. So it's a little bit more complex than this. And I'm going to bring up one of our former presidents, Andrew Jackson. Now, regardless of what you think about him, whether or not, when you say the name Andrew Jackson, you think of the Trail of Tears, or you think of the Battle of New Orleans, or you think of one of our presidents, one of the things he did that I haven't heard too much in history about, I have heard something about, was the fact of the matter was, when he was elected to be president, the country was already divided as is. There was a growing divide between the northern region, the southern region, and the western region, and Andrew Jackson was a unifying president at the time. He helped keep the country together. And I gotta say, guys, we can recognize this even today, that there's a lot of divide within this country as is. There are a lot of different cultures within this country that are all American cultures, but different from one of another. And the same was true back then. There was a growing divide in the nation. I mean, is it really so hard to see that there is a divide in the nation right now? With even our current president, Trump, you have people that don't like him. You have people that like him. You have people that don't care, and you have people somewhere in between. But there is still, nonetheless, a divide over Trump being elected in the nation. There is no getting around that fact. And the same was true back during the antebellum period. There was a growing divide between the northern states and the southern states. And when the Civil War kicked off, there was a belief within the Confederate States that this union was not working out so well for them. And so they wanted to succeed and form their own separate country. Now, moving on. One of the main targets for statue removal are the statues of Robert E. Lee. Now, Robert E. Lee was a general in the Confederate Army. He actually opposed secession. However, he turned the appointment to the Union Army down and took up an appointment to the Confederate Army because even though he didn't agree with his neighbors, he would rather defend them to put them to the sword. He would rather defend his neighbors than put them to the sword. And with this, by understanding this basic principle, you can understand what makes a professional soldier even better. You can understand the law of land warfare even better when you understand this basic principle. In basic training, one of the things that was drilled into our heads when it came to the law of land warfare was that the only transgression the enemy committed was simply being on the other side, was simply fighting for a different country. Strictly soldier to soldier, we're at war and we're fighting each other because our leaders failed to reach a peaceable agreement. That's what it is. That's why we don't subject our enemy prisoners of war to unnecessary pain and suffering just because they're our enemies. Which is why we do not specifically target their monuments. Their monuments have no military necessity for being destroyed. Granted, if the enemy is using the monuments for cover, or if they're positioned on their monuments, yes, we can attack the enemy and engage the enemy because there is a military necessity there. But we don't just arbitrarily destroy their monuments, nor do we target arbitrarily religious structures, hospitals, or anything of that nature. And this is a clear distinction that Antifa has with U.S. soldiers who actually fought the Nazis. And this is why Antifa has more in common with the Nazis than the average American does. Is Antifa has no problem with destroying monuments that they don't like, that don't agree with them. This is why they have no problem attacking non-combatants. And the Nazis did the same thing. Y'all ever heard of Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass? You ever hear of the Nazi book burnings? Yeah, Nazis burned books that didn't quite agree with them. Nazis didn't tolerate monuments that didn't fit their agenda, much like Antifa does today. The U.S. Civil War was, as some historians point out, the last war of gentlemen. And what I mean by that is after the war was over, they reintegrated the South, the Confederate States. They allowed the Confederate States to build those monuments to honor their dead, just the same as the Union built monuments to honor their dead as well, to honor the people who fought for them as well. And that was part of making the peace there is that the United States, were going to allow the Confederate States, the former Confederate States, to honor the people that fought for them as well in that Civil War, despite the disagreement. And that is a part of our history. And what makes us a rational and just country is that we don't simply erase our history when it doesn't suit our narratives. We take all parts of our history, good and bad. We acknowledge them, we understand them, and we work to make a better future. And the last thing we want to do is simply erase our history because it's simply not convenient for our feelings. And this is what distinguishes a rational human being, a rational and just human being, from organizations, groups, and movements such as the alt-left and the Nazis and the communists, even though a lot of the alt-left are pretty much communists themselves. But this is what distinguishes the rational and just human beings from them, is the fact that we don't believe in tearing down our history. We believe in being honest about our history. We don't think we should tear down our history, and as much as you want to wish our history away, you just simply can't do that. Our history is there, and you simply cannot change that. And no amount of tearing down monuments is going to make an impact on that. In fact, you are being incredibly dishonest at best and totalitarian at worst when you do these sorts of things. And again, I don't even know why I have to put this into words, why I have to vocalize this. I would figure it would be common knowledge, common sense. But the fact of the matter is that history's already been written, so to speak. History's already happened. There's nothing you can do to change history. Nor should we tear down our history either. Tearing down those monuments are going to accomplish nothing. But they're not going to change what's happened in the past. Regardless of how you see the monuments, they were our history. They are our history. And you're not going to erase that simply by tearing down history, which brings me to my next point. And that is, Antifa is just like the very fascists they claim to fight. So take your own advice, Antifa, and take a long walk off a short pier. And for everybody else, thanks for watching. I hope this video was very educational. And unlike Antifa, I am open to criticism. Thank you very much, y'all.